Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Austria remained divided after World War II. Austria had been annexed by Germany in 1938 in the so-called famous Anschluss. Throughout World War II, Austria had been part of the German Reich, and many people considered themselves to be German and not Austrian. This went on until Germany was about to lose the war. Many Austrians then started to claim that they were indeed the first victims of National Socialism or Hitler's expansionism. This argument was valid in OTL, and Austria remained for a few years divided. Austria saw a similar division as Germany, but of course there were a few differences. Korea also got divided. The USSR, US, UK and even France got an occupation zone for some years. Vienna too was divided in different sectors. After that, the Austrian State Treaty had been signed in 1955 and Austria became independent but wasn't allowed to take a side. Thus, it became a neutral state. Even, and this is a little detail, Yugoslavia was a signatory of that treaty. However, it's kind of clear that Austria was more pro-Western than pro-Soviet, wasn't it? Anyway, so let's come back to the discussion. And now let's discuss what if all of that changed and what if Austria remained divided after World War II. First of all, the argument of the Austrians being the first victims of National Socialism wouldn't work in this timeline. In this timeline, the Czechs as well as the Soviets would claim how the Austrians were welcoming Hitler and how many Austrians were part of the Nazi party, the Waffen-SS, and how they committed many crimes with the Germans against humanity. The Soviets would also in this timeline not see any sense of letting their share of Austria go, since they also tried to keep their part of Korea and Germany under their check. With that said, the Soviets would try to do everything possible to not give Austria their independence back, especially after the rejection of the Stalin Notes. This means that in this timeline, not only would we see the creation of two Germanys, two Koreas, also two Vietnams, but also two Austrias, a Federal Republic of Austria with their capital in Salzburg, and the Austrian Democratic Republic with Vienna as its official capital. Yes, there would be a few similarities between Austria and the Germanys, or well, actually the Austrias and the Germanys, but at the same time, the differences, they would be more pronounced. The communists would actually have a lot of support in Eastern Austria, and I don't think that Eastern Austria would face huge poverty and be even a little bit better off than Eastern Germany, for instance. Western Austria would probably allow a militarization to happen and the Allies would keep their bases in Austria. The same would happen for Eastern Austria, where the Soviet bases would have been expanded. This has also another effect in that region, and that's the militarization. Not only would Austria see many more soldiers, tanks, military equipment and whatnot, but also Switzerland would expand its own army, because at the end Switzerland is a neutral state. And the same would go for Yugoslavia as well. They would start to take good care of the northern part, just in case. While Eastern Austria and Eastern Germany would not be part of the same country anymore, I still believe that these two countries would coordinate a lot of their policies, and also the linguistic easiness, being that both of the countries speak German, would actually also help in that sense. And they would also try to coordinate policies if, for instance, people want to start to flee the country. Big fences, walls, a security police, etc. would be the consequence in Austria especially. At the same time, I think Austria would not go hardcore communist, but try to include some more conservative elements as well, just like Poland did, for instance. Yes, even though Poland was communist for some time, they still tried to include a lot of typical Polish stuff, conservative stuff, in the ruling segment or within the government, or even the church, for instance, would still play some type of role and would not be just closed down completely. Western Austria would become really fast part of the NATO, the predecessor of the European Union, and of course support transatlanticism. Due to the fact that Eastern Austria would be its own state, Western Austria would have more money available to rebuild their infrastructure. And that's because of the Marshall Plan, which Eastern Austria would also then of course reject. Salzburg would become a much bigger city and have a more important role, at least in Western Austria, than Vienna. Overall, I don't think that the Cold War would change that much, except that the Soviets and the US would have a bit more troops here and there in Europe, and especially that we would have two Austrias which would be integrated in both camps. But due to the small size and irrelevance that Austria would have compared to the US or the USSR, it would just be an additional territory that needed to be kept a little bit in check. I also don't think that Austria would somehow intervene in Hungary or Czechoslovakia for a few reasons. First of all, Hungary used to be part of Austria-Hungary or the Austrian Empire, and Eastern Austria would know better than to intervene. Some equipment, yes, might be given to the Soviets, but that's probably it. Second of all, as for Czechoslovakia, Eastern Austria would do the same as Eastern Germany and let the Soviets handle it. Sure, their troops would be part of the Warsaw Pact, but they would not intervene anywhere due to the historical legacy. Additionally, Austria would probably get a bit stricter on the denazification sides than in OTL. And Austria would see things similarly and do the things similarly as Germany did in OTL and still does. Discussions about crimes related to the Nazi past would be discussed more openly, and there would be less extreme right influence in ATL's Austria. As for the left wing, I also believe that the left, at least in Western Austria, would have even less influence than it did in our timeline, and this Western Austria would probably become a very conservative type of state, something that would be very close to the Republicans, or even a little bit more conservative than the Republicans. After the Cold War, Austria would unify just like Germany, but have an easier time doing so. Not only were both parts smaller, but Eastern Austria would in this timeline be the wealthiest communist state, and Austrian unification would not be objected by the other countries, unlike Germany's unification. A treaty would be signed between the four states and a couple of other states as well, probably, that would prevent Austria from joining Germany, but otherwise most of the things, they would remain the same. This newly united Austria would then be of course integrated in the West, but I also think that some remnants of the Russian influence or Soviet influence would still be very strong. We would see that certain parts in Vienna, they would have a more Soviet-like look. Certain parts, they could also be similar to Eastern Berlin, for instance, and also some cities would look very much the same as in other former communist states. I also believe that both of the Austrias, they would not face such a huge problem as the both Germanys did, but yes, we could see some internal migration going on within this newly united Austria, where a lot of Eastern Austrians, they would try to then go to the western part of Austria, but at the same time it wouldn't be as big or as problematic as it was in Eastern Germany, for instance. And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.